Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Last week, as you may know, we marked 100 years since Saka Nankana Sahib, or the Nankana Sahib massacre. It was part of the Gurdwara reform movement, but first we need to understand why Gurdwaras needed reform. After the capture of the Sikh commander Banda Singh Bahadur, the Mughal Empire issued an order for the extermination of the Sikhs wherever they were to be found. This forced many Sikhs to seek shelter in the jungles, deserts, and mountains of northern India. For many years, the Sikh Sardars fought the Mughal and Afghan armies, and they were constantly on the move, so they were not able to look after the Gurdwaras. The responsibility of managing the Gurdwaras was taken up by the Udasi Mahants. These Mahants were originally sadhus or saintly monks that are related to the Sikh tradition. Their differing appearance and orange clothes were less of a target to the state, and so they survived unharmed. By the end of the 1700s, the Sikhs had established their rule over Punjab. The Sikh Sardars had gathered great wealth through their revenue as rulers of the land, with which they made generous donations to the Gurdwaras. Maharaja Ranjit Singh had given lots of money and land to Sikh places of worship, including the gold plating that covers Sri Harmandir Sahib. Because of this, large amounts of wealth were now in the hands of the Mahants. After the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Sikh Empire was weakened, and it finally fell in 1849 to the British East India Company. The British began their total rule over Punjab. As the Sikhs still resisted, they sought to cripple the Sikhs from within. Firstly, they disarmed the Sikhs by prohibiting them from carrying weapons. Now that Sikhs were defenseless, they wanted to suppress the culture of sovereignty in Sikhs, which could cause resistance to their rule. In their eyes, the Gurdwara was a gathering place from which Sikh resistance could be organized, so it had to be under their control. So under the British system of property ownership, all of the Gurdwaras were listed as property of the Mahant in charge, instead of as belonging to the Sikh nation together. The Mahants now had free reign over the Gurdwaras, treating it as their personal hereditary property. They grew more and more powerful and more corrupt, and neglected their responsibility as servants and caretakers of the Gurdwaras. To top it all off, the British Indian government protected the Mahants from anybody who challenged them. In the Gurdwaras, the Mahants introduced many practices that were against the teachings of the Sikh gurus, including worship of idols, which is the Hindu way of worship, and in addition, the Mahants did not allow women and people of lower castes to enter the temples and offer prayers. As a result of this injustice, many people began to leave Sikhi. Some Sikhs struggled to define their identity and fell into the Hindu faith. Thus, the British favored the Mahant system as it suppressed the Sikhs. The Sikhs were on the decline and something had to be done. Many Sikh intellectuals, scholars, and other leaders banded together to revive the Sikh spirit. They decided that to begin, the Gurdwaras must first be freed from the corrupt system. Members of the Singh Sabha began printing their own newspapers, raising awareness among the village folk of the misdeeds of the Mahants. Their message was the same throughout. The Mahants must be removed from the Gurdwaras. Very soon, Sikh volunteers organized in groups known as Akali Jathas. The first victory came in October 1920 at Gurdwara Babe di Bear Sahib. The Akalis restarted the daily kirtan and langar seva at the Gurdwara themselves until the Mahants surrendered control. The Akalis' next target was Amritsar, the center of Sikhi under the control of the Mahant priests. Idols were worshipped by Hindu Pandits on the Parkarma and inside the Gurdwaras itself. In some Gurdwaras, brothels were open in the buildings near the Parkarma, and pornography was being sold inside as well. The Darbar Sahib itself had become so degenerated that it became a hub for thieves, gangs, and criminals. When the Akali leaders, Teja Singh Puchar and Kartar Singh Chabbar arrived, the Mahant priests fled Sri Darbar Sahib and Akal Takht Sahib without any resistance. After a protest by the Akalis, the government finally gave in and handed over the keys of the treasury. Sikhs gained full control over Sri Darbar Sahib without blood being shed. The next month, in 1920, the Shromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee was created, which would replace the Mahants as a system managing all of the Gurdwaras. The Shromani Akali Dal was formed as its political wing that organized the Akali Jathas. The energized Akalis sent a Jatha of 25 Sikhs to retake Panja Sahib, and after a clash, the Mahants were expelled. One after the other, Akalis retook many other Gurdwaras across the country, including at Anandpur Sahib. But there was one Mahant stronghold that remained, Nankana Sahib. It was the richest Gurdwara by far, as Maharaja Ranjit Singh endowed it with 20,000 acres of land and great wealth. Narayan Das was the name of the Mahant, who was the richest and lived within the Gurdwara itself. He frequently exploited Sikhs and others who came to visit the birthplace of Guru Nanak. His crimes in Nankana Sahib had become known to all, the local people of the town as well. Rape of women and children, human trafficking, prostitution, drinking, and many more. But all petitions to the government against Narayan Das had failed. In one instance, Narayan Das abducted a teenage girl who had come to visit the Gurdwara. He forcibly tied up her parents and raped the girl in his room, and invited all of his men into the room to do so as well. All of this happened in the birthplace of Guru Nanak. Narayan Das was backed by police and the local British government. On January 24, 1921, Kartar Singh Chabbar and Teja Singh Puttar tried to negotiate and said that they will hold an Akhand Path here in late February of 1921. Now at first the Mahant agreed too, and he said he would meet at Sultanpur Sahib for compromise, but in the end he didn't show up. He either intentionally deceived them, or he ended up changing his mind. Narayan Das fortified and stored arms and ammunition inside the Gurdwara. To assist him, he hired 28 Pathan mercenaries and other thugs for protection. In addition to that, he received police protection from the government and was backed by Mr. King, the Commissioner of Lahore, who supported the Mahant. On February 19th, Bhai Lachman Singh from village Tarowari left his village for Nankana Sahib with a jatha of about 156. In the early morning of February 20th, 1921, the jatha entered the Gurdwara and began to sing Asa Ki Waar. Suddenly, the Mahant's men launched a merciless attack upon the Sikhs. The hired thugs fired rifles upon the Sangat from the roof and slashed and hacked at them with swords. The Mahant rode around on his horse, shooting at Sikhs with his revolver. Lachman Singh was shot while sitting on the tabia of Guru Granth Sahib. He was then dragged out and hung upside down from a tree and then burnt alive. An 8-year-old boy, Darbara Singh, was also taken out of the Gurdwara and thrown alive into a burning pit of fire. The corpses of the Sikhs were chopped up and then thrown into piles and then cremated. At the end of it all, 156 were shaheed. The news of the massacre at Nankana Sahib spread like wildfire, and it sparked anger among the Sikhs of Punjab. Kartar Singh Chabbar and 1,000 Akalis formed a Shahidi Jatha. They came face to face with Mr. Curry, the local administrator, who was backed by a line of armed police. Mr. Curry demanded that the Sikhs disperse or they will use force. Kartar Singh replied and said, "We are ready to die for this place. Are your men ready to die? I'm going to count to 3 and you better hand over those keys." Kartar Singh didn't need to count. Mr. Curry stepped forward and handed over the keys to the Gurdwara. Narayan Das and his goons were arrested by the police, and the Mahant was sentenced to life in prison. The Sarup of Guru Granth Sahib at Nankana Sahib had been torn by bullets, as you can see in these pictures over here. There's also a large blood stain on page 1132 from Bhai Lachman Singh, who was reading Gurbani at the time he was shot. We remember the Shaheeds of Nankana Sahib, and those who gave our lives for our Gurdwara. जिन्हां ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਸਿੰਘਣੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਧਰਮ ਹੇਠ ਸੀਸ ਦਿੱਤੇ, ਬੰਦ ਕਟਵਾਏ, ਖੋਪੜੀਆਂ ਲੋਹਾਈਆਂ, ਆਰਿਆ ਨਾ ਚੁਰਾਏ ਗਏ, ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਲਈ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀਆਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਧਰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਹਾਰਿਆ, ਸਿੱਖੀ ਕੈਸਾ ਸਵਾਸਾ ਨਾ ਨਿਭਾਈ, ਤਿਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਮਾਈ ਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਧਰ ਕੇ, ਖਾਲਸਾ ਜੀ ਬੋਲੋ ਜੀ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ